Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the webinar that ACCOSCA has organized that focuses on the need for Sacco liquidity to help members during time of crisis. I'll say a good morning. That's a good morning, participants from Canada. I'll say a good afternoon to our colleagues from Ghana, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, the Gambia, down South Africa, to Botswana, to Malawi, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Eswatini. Good afternoon. I'll say good afternoon to our colleagues from East Africa, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and lastly, I'll say a good evening for our partners in ACCOSCA as an institution focuses on supporting or creating the dialogue that is required to support the financial cooperatives in the continent. One of the key things that we thought about this webinar is to consider what is the value proposition of the SACCOs. Why is SACCO in existence? I think it's a time that we try to evaluate how we can look at the growth and the liquidity prospects of our SACCOs across the continent, just like our colleagues in other various continents are looking at it in that manner. In responding to, or in order for us to get as much as possible from this discussion, we need to reflect on one key thing when you're having this presentation by our own Lois Kitsch, who is ACCOSCA. And one of the key things that then we'll want to see is, as we address this, is how do we reflect on the value proposition in terms of growth and liquidity prospect for the SACCOs in times of dislocation, which is more in terms of distortion, like financial crisis that happened in 2008, or COVID-19 that has happened today. Maybe next 5 years, we might have a different kind of dislocation that is affecting us. So with that, I'd like to invite Lois Kitsch to give a presentation. We are going to have roughly 45 minutes of engagement, and some of it will be having questions. We'll also like to ask the attendees you mute. Then the second part is, if you have a question, kindly send a chat question to the organizer. You're able to see that down there. Send a chat question to the organizer, then we'll quickly respond to the questions that you are raising. So kindly welcome Lois Kitsch to do a presentation in this webinar.
So good morning, George. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
So good morning, everyone from Africa. I am currently at home in Florida and feeling a little sad because my family and I were meant to travel to Kenya and South Africa in the next few days. So when you think about what's happening here across the globe, this pandemic is having a profound impact on me and American credit union members. In fact, according to a recent Gallup poll, 80% of credit union members feel that disruption is having an impact on their lives. Almost 76% of American credit union members feel financially disrupted. And I suspect that that is not only in America, but in global credit unions around the world. So if you would turn to the next slide, Maureen. There we go. In talking with credit union leaders both in the US and the UK, there is also a concern about the continued strength of the institution as well. In fact, a very well-known UK credit union CEO has shared recently her concern that her well-capitalized credit union will experience income issues for the next 2 to 3 years. Making me wonder, she's feeling very vulnerable and making me wonder about the vulnerability of credit unions and SACCOs everywhere. So today we're going to think about two things. We're going to think about the membership and how we serve our members during crisis, but we're also going to think about the vulnerability of institutions during this difficult time. The SACCOs most likely to survive any economic crisis have adequate capital to weather the storm and continue to grow. Are measuring capacity to pay in lending decisions that members make, or that credit unions make for members. Have a well-trained staff who are ready to take on the emotional needs of members during this difficult time. There are credit unions that manage their expenses and non-earning assets well. And probably most importantly, can manage the bureaucracy within their own institution to make quick and well-formed decisions, supported by volunteers, members, and staff. So moving to the next slide. So what we're going to talk about today is something that I've called for a long time, the Great Debate. And if you think about the Great Debate in two ways, is a credit union's primarily focus to ensure that building institutional wealth for the institution, or is the credit union's primary responsibility to build the member capability to ensure that members are moving up a path to self-sufficiency? So today we're going to swing back and forth. Sometimes I refer to it as a pendulum, the pendulum that swings too far to the business side. Credit unions have lost the opportunity to live their values and the economic opportunities that come with living values. Or the pendulum swinging to the building member capability side, where we're really thinking about members and how to help members through this economic time. So when we think again of the social sides, credit unions in the US are providing tangible help for members suffering economic setbacks due to COVID. These credit unions are waiving fees, lowering rates, add skip-a-pay options, offering unsecured loans to borrowers, while adding remote services to make things better for members. However, they also recognize that the business side of credit unions must be well monitored to ensure the credit union is protecting members' money and the strength of the institution. So today our conversation will be in two parts. What you need to do to protect and safeguard members' money by one of the key issues, having adequate liquidity to meet member needs. And the second one is how to help members with empathy and compassion and help them with the right products and services during times of crisis. So Maureen, if you move on. So today our conversation is around liquidity, and some of you will have heard some of this information before, but it's never more relevant to thinking about the sustainability of your SACCO than now. So we're going to talk very briefly about what is liquidity, what are the root causes of excess and lack of liquidity, what is the impact of liquidity issues, how should a credit union manage their loan portfolio, which has huge implications on liquidity? What steps do you need to take to grow your institutional capital? And of course, during this time of disruption, how do we help our members and our staff cope? So moving on, so thinking about this thing called liquidity. Liquidity in a Sacco is the money that is readily available for investments, capital growth, and spending. I think we all know what liquidity is. But it consists of cash and assets that are quickly converted to cash. So liquidity is a major source of concern and should be managed daily, weekly, monthly, and on an annual basis of every credit union and Sacco globally. Moving on. So when you think about the root causes of liquidity, lack of or excess liquidity, now a few African credit unions may have excess liquidity, but generally lack of liquidity is something they're facing. Now, you know you have liquidity issues if your members are waiting to get loans, if you're having difficulty paying operating expenses or difficulty in giving members shares or savings back. So a lack of liquidity comes generally from high delinquency, low institutional capital, ineffective loan policies, lack of savings mobilization efforts, high non-earning assets, lack of public trust, and high expenditures and overpriced products. When you think about excess liquidity, it is often from low demand, loan demand, or overpriced savings products. Now, it's interesting that a credit union that is facing either lack of liquidity or excess liquidity should really determine the root causes of the problem before they start to think about solutions. And today we're going to talk about solutions for lack of liquidity because I think that's more of an issue. So the impact of liquidity issues can mean the success or failure of any financial institution. Low liquidity means no loan growth, and what becomes stagnated membership growth. If you're unable, again, to pay expenses, expand, innovate, or grow your business model, will result in losing member confidence. Now, excess liquidity often leads to careless spending and poor business decisions. A quick example of a favorite Sacco of mine in the southern Philippines had a great deal of excess liquidity. Instead of determining the cause for that, they purchased a hotel which is now failing, causing great stress to the institution itself. So it's important to manage both low or excess liquidity. So moving on, lack of liquidity makes it very difficult for a Sacco to accommodate the special needs that happen to members during a crisis. Having empathy and understanding the challenges that members are facing must be coupled with the financial realities that the Sacco is facing. If a Sacco has no capital set aside for emergencies, then foregoing income from member loans or providing community support can jeopardize the safety of the institution and the member deposit that Saccos are entrusted to safeguard. However, on the other hand, the Sacco must recognize that members facing difficulties and encourage them to review the issue with the members to help find solutions. Again, such as skip a pay or access to emergency loans. So moving on. So capital, the credit unions that are able now to really provide resources and needs for communities and the membership are those that have accumulated adequate capital over a long period of time. If you look at the World Council's Pearl ratios, adequate capital is in our Saccos is 10% or more of the Sacco's total assets. This is the savings account for Saccos through times such as this pandemic. So next slide. So think about the ways you can grow your capital. And many of you will say this is not a time to grow capital, but it is certainly a time for us to recognize the need to grow and maintain adequate capital levels. A Sacco that, again, has successfully accumulated capital has done done so through a well thought out, executed growth plan. Institutional capital should grow to match or exceed the growth of the Sacco's assets. One of the strategies is a carefully thought out dividend plan. Good Sacco leadership, including the board and staff, will agree to focus on building institutional capacity by managing operating expenses, continually reviewing income and dividend expenditures. The capital accumulation plan should include strategies and activities that will inform members of why such a plan is necessary and why dividends should be reasonable and reflect the financial objectives and realities of the Sacco. A Sacco should never borrow money to pay dividends. That is a strategy for big difficulties in the future. The success of a Sacco is not related to the amount of paying inflated dividends, but in protecting members' savings and providing adequate products and services to meet the daily needs of members. So moving on, Maureen. The second thing we think about when we're starting to think about liquidity and capital accumulation is the accumulation of non-earning assets. Now, we all recognize that a credit union has to have a solid infrastructure to provide for the needs of the members within the community. It's also important to the image of the Sacco within the community. But non-earning assets should be carefully monitored. Assets should be, according to Pearls again, non-earning assets, no more than 5% of assets or less. And a non-earning asset is anything that doesn't generate revenue for the Sacco, such as automobiles, cars, and the like. The Sacco should be careful during the best of times, but certainly use caution now in the purchase of land, buildings, and vehicles. Remember, your core mission is serving members, not accumulating real estate. Credit unions should be very cautious about building landmarks to themselves and to become landlords, because during times difficult as this, people can't pay rent and it puts the financial institution in a precarious position. So I encourage you to use extreme caution now when we think about non-earning assets. Moving on to what I think is the primary cause of low liquidity issues in African Saccos. And I suspect you can guess if we move to the next slide, Maureen. I'm talking about the delinquent loan portfolio. Delinquency has a huge impact on the image of the Sacco, but certainly on the day-to-day operations and the service levels that a credit union can provide. Loan delinquency is very simple. It describes a situation where a borrower misses a single installment payment on an emergency auto, personal loan, or a mortgage, although I know most Saccos are not offering mortgages. A loan is delinquent on the first day of a missed weekly or monthly installment. Maureen? So whose responsibility is delinquent? It always causes me to smile when credit union professionals say it's all the member's fault. Well, in my thinking, yes, if the member chooses not to pay when they have the capacity to pay, it's their responsibility. But you know, the board sets policy for what delinquency control will look at. The CEO within the Sacco manages the culture. The loan officers underwrite the loans, whether it's based on traditional share-based lending or whether you're using capacity to pay. And your collection staff are need to do quick and prompt collections. So if a bad loan is written, is it the member's fault, or does the Sacco need to take and relook at how they manage their loan portfolio? Moving on to the impact of delinquency. The impact of delinquency is huge. It results in poor public image, lack of member and community confidence. It results in liquidity problems, members waiting for loans, or you're unable to pay out savings. The impact is earnings problems. The Sacco can't pay their bills or pay their staff. And certainly they can't pay the all-important dividends. So delinquency is measured. When I say a loan is delinquent on the first day of a missed payment, I get much pushback from my African credit union friends. But the reality is the loan is past due if the payment has not been made. However, measurement generally begins on a past due loan right around 30 days past due. The entire loan balance is considered delinquency and is included in the delinquency ratio. So remember the magic number is delinquency should be no more than 5% of the total delinquency, which is delinquent loans divided into the total loan portfolio. If your delinquency is 10 or 20 or 30%, I suspect you're having liquidity issues. If you don't know what your delinquency is, that could be a critical step in moving your Sacco forward and managing liquidity, is to go out and age your delinquency portfolio. So moving on, loan write-off. I've also worked in Saccos across Asia and was always interested when I asked them about charging off loans, and their response is no, our members will pay. And in reviewing their loan portfolios, we find loans past due 29 years still listed on the balance sheet. And I said to them, these people are probably dead. It's likely they won't pay. So any loan more than 12 months past due or any loan where payment is unlikely should be removed from the balance sheet. Failure to do so is presenting an unrealistic view of the credit union's operations. Income accruals must also stop on written off loans. Now, it's important also to note that write-off does not mean collection efforts stop. So moving forward, so to provision for loan losses, and I think that you also call it charge-off in Africa, but provision is just an estimation of uncollectible loan amounts within the credit union's portfolio. You could call it a savings account for possible losses on your loans. In order to recognize potential or locally loan losses, the credit union will reduce the book value of loans by the amount that's expected to lose. Moving on. So I'm going to make a very controversial statement for African credit unions, and some of you will not agree, and I do appreciate that. But the fact is, dividends should stop being paid to a member who has a delinquent loan account. It's really important to recognize that income from loans is what funds dividend. If a member has a loss and is not also helping to fund the dividends, they shouldn't receive a dividend. Now, some of you will come back and say to me, well, what about members that don't have loans? If they have savings or investments within the Sacco, that is actually what funds the loan demand. And of course, they should also receive dividends. Moving on. So here, in my work with across Africa in the regional congresses or in the forum, the Congress, we've talked about this many times, the many ways that provisioning for loan losses happen. What's important to recognize is that you follow local guidance, your local regulations on how your loans are provisioned. It's really important to recognize that loans should start to be provisioned for at 60 or 90 days, depending on what's appropriate for you. I would say that 30% of a delinquent loan balance should be transferred to the provision account at 60 days. 50% at 90 days, 75% at 180, and all loans over a year past due should be charged off. Failure to do so represents an inaccurate financial statement. So let's talk very quickly and very briefly about loan underwriting, because in my opinion, this is a critical time for credit unions to start to think about measuring capacity to pay as well as other fees of credit, if you will. Loan underwriting is the process a lender uses to determine if the risk of offering a loan to a particular borrower is okay under certain parameters or it's acceptable. So underwriting is critical, and many African credit unions are still used share-based lending to determine. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times your shares in determining the loan amount a member can borrow. So share-based lending is loan size based on share investments and or savings, but it does not measure ability to pay, which is critical during these times of crisis. Share-based lending has a standardized pricing, often requires a guarantee. Now, here's the thing about share-based lending. It's easier, but it's much less effective in measuring risk than capacity to pay. When you're using capacity to pay to determine a member's ability to borrow, the loan size and approval are based on the member's financial capacity to pay, not on an arbitrary amount that's sitting in a share investment account. So when we think about how underwriting happens, it happens through character, capacity, capital, collateral, and conditions. So capacity to me is the most important C. Others will say it's character, but for me, in order to determine whether how much a member should borrow, it should be based on their ability to pay. Payment history should be taken into account. Their employment history, are they working and do they have means of support? What does their current income and expenses situation look at within the home? Capacity to pay says you must have the necessary income to meet current loan obligations, provide for food and shelter, adequate savings for emergencies, and to pay the new loan as agreed. So I call it thinking backwards to move forward. Normally, a member will come into the Sacco and talk to a loan officer, tell them they wish to borrow, and the loan officer will tell them, this is what you're eligible for based on your shares, and then a payment amount is given. Now, it doesn't always reflect the borrower's needs, the purpose of what they want the loan for. They may need to borrow far less than they during the current traditional 2, 3, 4 times criteria that's being used. Instead, I encourage, ask the Sacco first of what the purpose of the loan is, but then what loan payment can they afford to make? Then tell them the amount that they can prudently borrow, which has a better way of for them to manage and understand the cost of credit. The second one is character. As outlined in loan policies, character refers to good employment history, in a stable job, has previous Sacco loans, and manages money well. The third one is really important during times of crisis, and it ties to loan purpose. Understanding the loan purpose will help a Sacco clearly understand how much money the member actually needs to borrow. It's important to note that a good down payment on any project or loan purpose decreases the chance of delinquency because the member now has skin in the game, if you will, and has something to lose by not repaying. Right now, conditions and terms to think about is, how does the borrower intend to use the money? Again, loans with a purpose are more likely to be paid. How are the payment structures, and do they make sense for what the members' needs are? Something that African credit unions do very little of is taking in collateral. And I know all of the reasons why they do not do that. But in times right now in crisis, collateral is the asset that can be recovered if the member does not pay. Of course, the member must understand that failure to pay will result in recovery of collateral. A cosigner or guarantor is only collateral if he can actually pay the debt if the member does not pay. We've had instances in African credit unions where one guarantor maybe guaranteed 10 or 12 loans, which he does not have the capacity, nor should that member be put in the situation of that kind of debt load. Cosigners should not cosign for multiple borrowers and must have capacity to repay the debt the same as the borrower. So the big question when we start to think about liquidity, and we have the conversation about building institutional reserves and growing a strong Sacco, is will the member pay the credit union? What is their payment history, employment and income stability, their level of indebtedness? What is their loan type, their loan term, their net worth? Now, I understand what I'm suggesting you start to think about is far more work on a daily basis in the short term. But in the long term, it will bring about a culture within the credit union of repayment and will help members recognize how and when they really truly need to borrow. So prevention comes first to build liquidity. Sound underwriting. Make sure the member has the means to pay.
Sorry, we seem to have lost Lois online, and perhaps Maureen, maybe you could take us through the poll questions as we try to restore connectivity with Lois. We have some poll questions. We need to hear from you what your feel is in terms of sharing your experiences about the impact of COVID on your liquidity and the impact it has had on your operations based on the questions. And for any further engagement, please feel free to get in touch with ACCOSCA on info@accosca.org. Let's take 1 minute to respond to the poll questions that are before us.
Because it has no roof. So I hope everyone can see the questions. Just to recap, the question on the screen: what is the impact of COVID-19 on member savings? I'll take that again. What is the impact of COVID-19 on member savings? A, increase. Have the savings increased? B, are the savings at the same level? Are they same as before? C, have the savings decreased? And D, it could be any of any other response besides what we have on the screen. And at that point, kindly would appreciate if you send your message on the email provided, info@accosca.org. Just to recap that again, what is the impact of COVID-19 on member savings? A, the savings have increased. B, same as before. C, decrease. And 4, it could be any other reason. And for that, kindly send us that reason on the email provided, info@accosca.org. Maureen, if you could kindly put up the second question.
Followed by the pound or hash sign. To enable audio control, please enter your audio. Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an attendee in listen-only mode.
Okay, so that's not going to work. Let's go back out.
Lois, I'm glad to hear you're back.
To webinar. Could hear you.
Maureen, second question, please. Okay, looks like we've restored connection. Okay, there you go. The second question is up. So hopefully all our listeners can view the question. I'll take you through it. What kind of support would you require with the liquidity management in your SACCOs, in your credit unions? What kind of support would you require with liquidity management in your SACCOs or in your credit unions? A, would you require liquidity stimulus?
I need
B,
to do it under.
policy review. C, training. And D could be any other apart from those that are listed. And again, we would request for you to just send that response via our email, info@accosca.org. So as we answer that question, I would also just encourage you to send any questions that you might have via chat. When you look at your screen on the right-hand side, there's a position provided below where you can type in your message. So kindly use that opportunity to drop in as many questions as you want, which then our presenter will have time to respond to at the end of the presentation.
We are also receiving feedback that some participants are not able to click to select the questions. So kindly send your responses to info@accosca.org. Send your responses to info@accosca.org. Thank you. So if we have any questions, please send any other questions to info@accosca. We're trying to restore connectivity with Lois. She should be with us in a minute.
Lois, welcome back. Are you back with us? Okay, so I can see you, Lois, but we can't hear you. Lois, we still can't hear you. Okay. All right, we are back. Unfortunately, technological issues could not allow us to get back to Lois. However, we will still proceed. And for those who can see your screen, we just want to share with you the results of the poll that we've just conducted. On the first question, we asked, what kind of support would you require with liquidity management? 44% of you answered that you needed a liquidity stimulus. 23% said they needed support with policy review. 31% say they require training. And 2% gave an opinion besides the 3 that we have just shared with you. So again, thank you so much. This is feedback that we will take seriously, and obviously come up with plans to support you as our fellow cooperators and to ensure that we manage liquidity much better in our areas of operations. And remember, those who have given us an opinion besides the three, we will still review your email, so please ensure you just send it through the email that was given, and we will definitely get back to you. But thank you very much for this feedback. I don't know if our technical team would provide us the answers to the next question. Maureen? Okay, and the other question was, what is the impact of COVID-19 on your member savings? This is what we said. 8% actually confessed that there was an increase in their member saving. 22% say, well, the levels remain the same. So there was not a difference before COVID and after COVID, and during COVID. And the other set, 71% confessed that there was a decrease in the level of member saving. Obviously, that paints a picture on the areas that we need to work, and together we will come up with ways and initiatives to support, especially those who have had challenges with the decrease in member savings. And obviously none in terms of any other. So we just want to thank you for this feedback that we've gotten. We truly hope that this session was beneficial to all of you. At this point, would have loved to
am I on now?
Oh, perfect.
I'm back on, right?
Yes, Lois, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I don't know exactly what happened here. And you know, anybody who knows me well knows I have no technological skills at all. But I am back, so we can continue as needed.
Yes, Lois, we are glad to have you back. Thank you very much. We were just concluding on questions that we posed, the quick poll questions.
Okay.
And actually, yeah, 71% of our members responded to the fact that the savings of their members have gone down. Yeah, so obviously, we believe that this is something that you've captured and you will continue capturing even during your presentation. But obviously, as ACCOSCA, we are open for further engagements to ensure that our members come to a level that they are comfortable, equally to serve those that require any financial assistance, but also to stimulate the institutional strengthening that the savings at a level where they're comfortable of sustainability. So I'll hand it over back to Lois.
Okay, I apologize, everyone. Again, I'm not sure what happened. And I was very interested in the questions, so I'm sorry that I missed them. If Maureen can bring back the slides, we'll just push forward so we can move on to questions.
Okay.
So we were at the point of talking about the whole idea around the vulnerability of credit unions during any time of crisis, especially credit unions that are not well capitalized, that don't control their non-earning assets, that have uncontrolled expenditures for daily operational expenses. And certainly the management of their loan portfolio is absolutely critical to the success of the Sacco and protecting members' savings. We know that within the last couple of years, there's been loss of Saccos and members lost deposits. So we need to ensure during this time, in times of crisis, that we're prepared institutions ready to take on a crisis because we have so well managed our loan portfolio. So this being said, Maureen, I'm going to move us all the way forward to a slide called the Great Debate so we can make sure we move on and have time for questions. So if you could move us forward. move forward. And again. Okay, so let's start here. Let's go back one slide. So we've talked a great deal about the business side of the pendulum. We've talked about maintaining institutional strength and the vulnerability that some credit unions may feel during this pandemic and other times of crisis, as well as the day-to-day operations of running a credit union. But I think let's think of the other side of the pendulum, and let's start to think about this very briefly from a member's perspective. According to Gallup, in a recent study along with an organization called Callahan in the US, members who perceive their credit unions care about their financial well-being have more confidence in its motives and greater trust in the value of credit union guidance. This means in the short term, members will use tools provided by the credit union to create better outcome for themselves and for their families. But long term, on the other side of the pendulum, on the business side, if you will, it creates greater member loyalty and a deeper share of their business. So empathy differentiates credit unions and builds goodwill that will pay dividends in the future. So due to the economic impact of the pandemic, supporting members' financial well-being should become a central issue for credit unions. Again, I said this earlier, but 76% of Americans feel like they're going to be negatively impacted by this disruption. Well-being is the managing one's economic life to decrease stress and an increase security is basically what financial well-being. In short, it's one's emotional relationship to money. So the same Gallup poll of American credit union participants showed data that the financial well-being of Americans is deteriorating, and that the percentage considered thriving is decreasing while percentages considered struggling and suffering are growing. Now, I know there's a vast difference between the US and our response to COVID. For us, I live in a very small place. We have 1,000 cases. We've had over 100,000 deaths. I know that in talking to George, the health issues have not been as great a concern in Africa as what we're experiencing in the US. However, I do believe in my heart of hearts that there is going to be financial repercussions felt not only in America, but around the globe, that we really need to think about our institutions as well as our members. So in this same Gallup poll, a question was asked of credit union members. In what way can your credit union support you and your family during this situation? And interestingly enough, first and foremost was increase my peace of mind. Help me manage with the stress of not knowing what is to come. It means listening to your members, providing empathy, understanding, and connecting to where they are in that moment. They talked secondly about build my hope and continually be there through the guidance and solutions. Now, there's many product solutions that credit unions can offer if it makes sense for the overall institution. Products like Skip a Pay, where a member is allowed to skip a couple of payments to get back on their feet financially until they're back working or back recovering from unexpected expenses. And of course, emergency loans, you're well aware of emergency loans as well as remote access to services. The third thing that they talked about that was also very interesting was reduce unnecessary stress. Make it easy for credit union members, Sacco members, to access the staff and tools when they need them in a way that makes sense for them. These three things are what members need most from their credit union right now, and thereby should serve as a framework for providing excellent service during this crisis and beyond. So again, it's recommended that credit unions formally organize a member continuity planning around these urgent strategic needs. So how can you do this? There's a simple word called ACT on the next slide, Maureen. So act with empathy. Acknowledge your members' emotional state and validate their feelings. Confirm your members' needs, reassure them through dialogue, and when possible, provide them with needed products and solutions. There are 4 simple strategies that credit unions can use to help a member actually maintain financial security. One of them is to spend wisely. These are very simple but yet effective tools. Help them understand the importance of consistent savings and offer savings products that make sense for them. Savings products where they have access to their money when they need it. Help them to borrow, but only when needed and only amounts that make sense. So borrow wisely. And finally, they need to plan for tomorrow during this crisis, but also to plan for the future and beyond. So as we move to the next slide, it's really important that we start to think strategically. So what are you learning from this crisis that can help you run a better Sacco in the future? What changes should you be making in the future? And what changes can you start to make right now to improve the services that you're providing members? The next slide will talk about collaboration. So this is a time to collaborate. Find a partner Sacco. What do you need to know from other Saccos and what are you willing to share? How can you work together to better serve all Sacco members and the greater community in which they live? And finally, let's just think about it. The next slide, Maureen, the last slide before we go to questions. What we've talked to you today is about understanding the business side of running credit unions. If you're not already doing so, it's really important for you to start a capital growth plan and understand the importance of having savings for a rainy day, just like you encourage your members to have. It's important to review your lending policies and determine whether now is the right time to start to think about measuring a member's capacity to pay. There's never been a time more critical to manage expenses and to control your non-earning assets. So that's the business side of the pendulum. If you think of the social side of the pendulum, use empathy in working with your members. Understand they're going through a difficult time and they may not clearly understand how to talk about it or how to get advice. And that takes training staff to think about how we talk to members during this difficult times. And finally, find ways to build their financial capacity through planning, saving, spending, and borrowing plans for members. So I want to thank you for the time that we had this morning together thinking about this thing called the pendulum. And I would like to turn this back to George for questions or for comments related either to your survey that you did or the information that I provided.
Thank you, Lois, for that presentation.
You're welcome.
And yeah, and I know we have some questions that have come through. Maureen, if you can share some of the questions. We have some questions that have come through. Perhaps before we go through that, I just want to comment on the key issues that you highlighted. You've been able to highlight the key challenges that SACCOs are facing at the moment, considering the current situation, the COVID situation. And as per the polls, we could see that there's been a decline in terms of savings for some institutions. And we've also seen there is appetite, of course, for a stimulus. SACCOs need assistance in terms of liquidity, addressing the challenges that they are faced with. And we've been also able to understand what the situation is like in terms of the measures being undertaken by the various SACCOs that are in attendance today. And the key issues that you articulated were to do with the liquidity management. You went through the ratios that need to be maintained in terms of maintaining the liquidity ratios, the adequate liquidity ratios, the delinquency ratios of maintaining not more than 5%. And I believe there's been quite a lot of take homes for the participants in the background. Let me just check again with Maureen on the questions. Sharon, do you have the questions?
Yes, Joanne. Thank you so much, Lois, for that wonderful presentation.
Nice to hear your voice.
Right, so I will take the first one. Lois, I hope I'm clear enough. You're on the hot seat now.
That's okay.
All right, so this is from Dorothy. Dorothy asks, for the loans that are being delinquent due to COVID-19, what are some of the ways we can mitigate?
So it's interesting you asked that question because, and hi, Dorothy, because right now we really want to act with kindness and compassion to our members. I recently had a text message. I was texting back and forth with a young CEO of a credit union, and he said they really recognized that they needed to reach out and give their members loans. But he was starting to be concerned that he was starting to have problems with those loans going delinquent or past due. So the difficult time that you're going to have right now is really balancing the needs of members, but also confirming that those members actually are able to pay back the debt that you're giving them. Because giving a member a loan that they cannot repay makes adds more stress and anxiety to their lives, and it is put the SACCO in jeopardy. So besides saying that's a very difficult situation, I'd say to you, you have to be very careful in the measurement and the disbursement of loans right now. Members must be able to show that they have the capacity to repay. You should be continually looking, are there other options and other ways to help a member during this difficult time? So for example, if your SACCO member has more than one loan at the SACCO, instead of giving them additional funds, is it possible to let them skip a couple of loan payments for the interim during this time? It's very difficult for me to give you a better answer because giving members loans that they can never afford to repay really is not helping anyone. If you're choosing to do that, then you're choosing to make a decision that you're going to act like a charity and you're just going to give your members money away. So I'm sorry, Dorothy, it's a really difficult situation. You also need to determine whether your member has the ability to pay, they just don't want to pay, or whether they just don't have the means to pay. If they don't have the means to pay, it's very difficult to do anything. If they have the means to pay and are choosing not to pay, this is a time to think about the fact if I had collateral, I could recover that collateral as an incentive to get the member to pay.
Thank you, Lois. I think you've answered that well. We have another question from Daudi Lazaro. He's asking, from your opinion, do you think if a SACCO offers loans to members, do they eventually risk SACCO operations? And eventually, how should they overcome this as well?
So it was Dauda, did you say?
Daudi Lazaro.
So that question is really relevant because if a member can repay the debt, you're not putting them at risk. So it comes back to the classic case of, can the member afford to pay? If your SACCO is using the traditional share-based lending where you're only basing lending decisions by the size of the balance in their investment account, it could be very likely you're going to have difficulty getting members to pay. If you're not measuring, if you're not asking questions about how do you intend to repay the debt, what does your debt load look like? What does it look like when we add this additional debt? There is a high responsibility that the member will not repay the debt. So my best advice for everyone now is to rethink the strategy of share-based lending, moving towards a capacity-based lending strategy. There's a lot of research and a lot of information out there. I'd be happy to provide guidance to anyone as needed on how to transition away from share-based lending into capacity-based lending. There's also some African SACCOs that are doing it very well that I'm sure would be willing to provide guidance to everyone to make that switch.
Thank you, Lois.
You're welcome.
The next question is from Botswana. Sorry, I didn't get the name. The person asks, should liquidity ratios be adjusted during time of crisis? And if so, what is the acceptable level?
So here's the thing, the ratios are the ratios. And I learned that specifically in my work in Asia. For many of you know, I spent many years working with very troubled SACCOs in that southern Philippines. Many of them with delinquency rates, 60, 70, 80%. And the response I always got from them was, well, things are different here, so the standard should be different here. But the reality is the standard is the standard, no matter what time or what you're actually facing. Now, how you respond to the standard may be different than how you would respond to it during other times. So the liquidity ratio should stay the same. It shouldn't change. Now, how you manage your liquidity it can change in times of stress such as this. It may mean that your liquidity is used to fund member loans instead of using it to do that infrastructure improvement you were looking for. It may mean board members not taking a stipend. It may mean a reduction in salaries of a small percentage for your staff. It may mean all different kinds of ways that you can drive liquidity back into the SACCO, but the standard doesn't change.
We have another question from Jeanette. How do we balance business and member demands in a case whereby a member loses their revenue earning means and are in dire need of financial assistance to survive whilst their loan is already in delinquency?
See, this is the difficulty of what you're all facing right now, because when you're in the midst of a crisis you haven't prepared for, it's very difficult to meet your loan demand. If you're a SACCO that planned ahead for this pandemic or for crisis by building institutional reserves so you could weather the shock, you'd be in a position to understand what kind of calculated risk can you take in the form of reducing your capital to serve your members. However, if you have very little capital, you have to be very careful because your institution is vulnerable right now. And that by moving the pendulum too far to the social side and not managing the business, you could actually lose your institution and thereby all of your members' savings. So weathering the storm is going to take a lot of creativity. It's going to take a lot of really hard decisions. Here's something you're going to hate me for saying, and it's very controversial. You can choose not to pay dividends for a year or two and use that money to shore up members that really need it, because this is not business as usual. Today, you need to start a capital accumulation program in order to understand, how do I grow my capital? How do I continue to grow capital so that in the future when these things happen, I'm well prepared. Again, there's SACCOs in Africa that have done a great job weathering the storm, because over the last 5, 7, 10 years, they've been building institutional reserves by lowering their dividends, by managing their infrastructure really well, by running a loan portfolio that's really sound and safe, but it's also by communicating with members. Because right now, when you don't communicate carefully with members are not going to understand the difficult decisions that need to happen right now to ensure the safety of your institution and at the same time help your members. That's tough, I know.
This next question, this is from Babuka Jo, the Gambia. Should there be a synchronized process for determining loan amounts instead of looking at it as share-based lending versus capacity-based lending?
Okay, it all comes down to the capacity. If you decide that all members get the same loan, some will be able to pay and some will not. So the reality is it always needs to be based on capacity, and that recognizing that every single member has a different ability to pay. So I know we want to be fair and equitable in our SACCOs, and we want everyone to have access to what we consider to be a fair and equitable opportunity for service. But with that service also comes responsibility. And the responsibility is that I, as the SACCO, will provide for the member as to the best of the SACCO's financial ability. The responsibility of the member is to understand what their capacity is and their ability to pay. So there should not be a one-size-fits-all loan unless it's a very small 2,000 shilling, for example, in Kenya, loan that people can get to buy food. Otherwise, it needs to be based on whether the member can afford to pay and how much they can afford to pay. Hard times and hard thoughts.
And then we have another question, Lois, from Sally from Kenya. She asks, what advice would you give a SACCO which already has a non-operating asset ratio of above 5% and are also in the process of working with their members to assist with moratoriums during this time without adversely affecting the SACCO over liquidity too much?
Well, you're going to affect the SACCO. So you have to plan for that, Sally. You have to decide whether it makes financial and social sense for the SACCO to do this. One of the things that's very difficult when you have very high non-earning assets, and I know there are SACCOs that have extremely high non-earning assets, they have big fancy buildings and the like, divesting yourself of this property and finding something more reasonable is what I would normally say. However, when you're in times of crisis, real estate prices fall, it might not be an opportune time to decrease the amount of non-earning assets that you have. So you have to look at what you have, what makes financial sense. You have to build a strategy and a business plan. It's also important to run your numbers. What is the impact of a diminishing loan portfolio? What is the impact of having no loan income actually going to do to the balance statement and the income statement? Not just for today, but for next year. So I told you about my friend in the UK who is well capitalized, but she is having delinquency issues unprecedented for her that she's never had before. And what she's done is she's actually run her financial statements, whether it's what she anticipates they're going to look like in 2021 and 2022. And that's where her concern comes from, is that she's not feeding her loan portfolio with good loans for the future. So it's not just today you need to think about. You need to think about, what is this loan portfolio going to look like a year from now and 2 years from now? Project what you do, the impact of what you do will have on your members. So I can't just tell you what to do without research. And that research needs to happen by each of you. through your CFOs, your financial officers, or someone who has an ability to understand trends and numbers.
Thank you, Lois. The last question that we'll take is from Charles from Tanzania. He's asking, from your opinion, is it really bad if we reduce interest rate for loans for our members? Because from his experience, most of the central banks are reducing their interest rates to the banks.
Okay, well, it's possible if you're well capitalized and you're in a good financial position that is exactly what you should do. But again, you don't just arbitrarily change interest rates without doing some kind of analysis to understand what the impact is going to be on the institution. And it could be very simple of saying, okay, currently we're charging 12%. We're going to lower the rate to 6%. What does the loss of that 6% mean to the institution for the coming short months? And what is it going to mean for the institution in the future? Is it also going to create expectation for members that the 6% is now the new norm? So it means having a strategy, having a plan for the financial decisions that you're making right now. It can be exactly the right thing for one credit union to do and the wrong thing for the credit union across the street to do. Analyze, research, think through the process, but think quickly. I mean, when I said bureaucracy, you need to be able to make good decisions based on facts, not on feelings. And you need to be able to use those decisions to drive a business model that will make sense for you now and into the future, while also trying to assist your members to really have access to the affordable credit that they need. So if I know we're on the last question, so if I could say one final thing to all the SACCOs, I know many of you well. Many of you are very close and very dear friends of mine. And I can say without any reservation that now you're on the cusp of a time for change and a time for rethinking and re-strategizing how we work with members, how we understand that working with a member with love and compassion is not weak, it's strong. Listening to the members and trying to understand and provide what they need. But in order to adequately do that, you have to run a strong institution. And it means capital accumulation is more important than dividends right now. It means that understanding how to measure capacity to pay is critical. Now, one thing I want to say really quickly, I'm not saying cut off all your members' dividends, then you'd have a problem with your members. I'm saying strategize in how you grow that capital so that when this crisis is over and you can breathe relief, the next crisis that comes along, you're prepared. I love you all. I miss you all. I'm supposed to be there now, and I'm hoping to get back at least by the end of the year.
Thank you, Lois.
Back? You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for your for sharing with us key lessons on liquidity management, particularly at this time when we are faced with a lot of challenges as SACCOs. And I would like to also apologize. George was had issues with the connectivity, so he hasn't been able to join us. And as such, I would like to thank all of you for your participation, especially participants. We've got a lot of questions that came in, and we'll try to respond to them through the info on individual basis. And what I can say is we've had lots of questions and the response is good. So thank you so much for attending this webinar. And going forward, we have a program that has been lined up for other webinars, and we're hoping that you'll be able to join us. We have, we'll be having a webinar on the 9th of June on helping members weather the COVID storm through financial counseling programs. And of course, we know that at this point, there's a lot of confusion both in the institutions and the members. So these are important talks and subjects that we need to continue talking through. And then on the 16th, We'll also have a talk on the member experience above and beyond service. This will be done by Angela. We'll have on the 23rd of June, recruiting and retaining talented staff to grow the Sacco business, particularly at this time when we are faced with the hard decision of whether to scale down or to expand. And then we will also have on the 30th of June, a talk on understanding member needs to the wake of disruption. With that, I would like to thank you so much for your participation, and we wish you all the best in your endeavors. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so I noticed George is back. I don't know if George would want to make your final remarks. Okay, we've lost him again. Thank you very much, everyone who was able to come in. We truly appreciate it. Most importantly, thank you, Lois. We would love to see you again. And we look forward to joining you again on the 9th for even better and tantalizing session like this one. Thank you all and see you. Bye-bye.